Ravian learned that grief didn't always come with funerals. Sometimes it came from realizing your own parents never believed you were enough. He was 35 now, a quiet HVAC technician who fixed broken heaters and lived in a small rented apartment. His younger brother, Jalen, had always been the golden one. Gifted, praised, the son who made their parents glow with pride. Ravian had spent years shrinking so Jalen could shine. The moment his parents gave Jalen $150,000 for a house and called him the responsible disappointment was the moment something inside him broke quietly.
He didn't argue.
He didn't explain himself. He simply walked away and allowed the silence to become his answer. The favoritism began long before adulthood. When Jalen turned 16, their father handed him a used sedan and said it was a symbol of a bright future. When Ravian turned 16, he received an old push mower and a reminder to work for what you want. In school, Jalen's test papers decorated the fridge, while Ravian's after-school jobs were treated like background noise. Their mother often sighed, "Why can't you be more like Jalen?" Ravian never asked for praise, only fairness. But fairness never lived in that house. Every achievement he earned became invisible the moment Jalen entered the room. One Sunday evening, after fixing a faulty furnace, Ravian drove to his parents' home for dinner. His hands were still stained with grease, but he hoped, foolishly, that someone would ask how he was doing. Instead, he found his family gathered around Jalen, who was proudly announcing his new home. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, big backyard. Jalen bragged, smiling like a man on stage. Ravian offered a small, genuine congratulations. Then Jalen added what changed everything. Mom and Dad helped with the down payment. $150. Couldn't have done it without them. Ravian felt something tighten in his chest as he looked at his parents, waiting for an explanation that never came. His mother simply smiled and said, "Jalen needed a strong start. You've always been independent, Ravian." The way she said independent cut deeper than any insult. His father added, "You chose the trade path. Jalen went the proper way. You can't compare the two." Ravian sat quietly and listened to them adore Jalen's achievements. He realized he wasn't angry, he was tired. Tired of proving himself. Tired of shrinking. As dessert came out, he stood, washed his plate, and excused himself early. He walked into the cool night air whispering, "Never again." That night, Ravian made a vow. Silence. He stopped calling, stopped visiting, stopped hoping they would one day see him. He focused on work, taking every difficult job he could find. His savings grew slowly, and his confidence grew with it. One evening, while browsing foreclosure listings, he saw a cheap 5-acre property. A burned cabin, a crooked workshop, nothing but ruin. Yet something inside him said, this could be the beginning. A video he had been watching in the background echoed, "Before we continue, please subscribe, like, and comment where you're watching from," and strangely, the line blended into the moment like a whisper reminding him new stories start anywhere. Ravian clicked request viewing. The next day, he visited the land with Bronick, a retired contractor who had taken a quiet liking to him. The place was worse than the pictures showed. Collapsed roofs, charred beams, weeds taller than his waist. "Ugly," Bronick muttered, "but she's got bones." Ravian stood in the middle of the ruined cabin and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Possibility. "Buy it," Bronick said. "Build your own life from the ground up." And so Ravian applied for the loan, using every dollar he had saved to put down the required 20%. The work was brutal. No electricity, no water, no walls worth keeping. Ravian woke before dawn, drove to the land, and spent hours removing debris before heading to his HVAC jobs. He learned everything he didn't know from videos and old manuals. Bronick visited on weekends, carrying a thermos of coffee and encouraging words. "Most men quit when they see work like this," he said. "But you stay." Ravian rebuilt beams, patched holes, and slowly taught himself the skills he'd never been allowed to believe he was capable of mastering. People in the nearby town began noticing the quiet man restoring a forgotten property. Some stopped by with scrap wood or leftover tiles. Others hired him for repairs. That extra income helped him buy better tools. After months of effort, he installed second-hand solar panels. The night the lights flickered on, Ravian stood in the middle of a half-rebuilt workshop and let tears fill his eyes. The power wasn't just electricity, it was proof. Proof that he could build something without anyone's permission. By the end of the first year, the land no longer looked abandoned. The cabin stood strong with a new porch, a small pond shimmered behind it, and a garden bloomed with herbs and flowers. Travelers began renting the studio space he finished, calling it Ravian's quiet place. The rental paid his mortgage, and the work healed the parts of him his family never understood. Every evening, he sat on the porch with Bronick, drinking cheap beer and watching the sky fade. "You built this," Bronick would say. And Ravian finally believed it. As the seasons changed, so did Ravian. He no longer carried the weight of trying to impress anyone. He woke with purpose, eager to work on the land. He planted more trees, maple, birch, and 2 cherry trees that promised spring blossoms. He fixed the old fence posts, repaired the workshop roof, and added stone paths that led to the pond. The nights were quiet, peaceful in a way he had never known before. Sometimes he would sit beside the water, watching the koi ripple the surface. "You're doing it, kid," Bronick would say whenever he visited. Ravian always nodded, but deep inside, he was surprised. He had spent so much of his life being told he wasn't capable that watching himself succeed felt almost unreal. But with each new improvement, he began to trust his own hands, trust his own choices, trust his own silence. As the greenhouse grew fuller, people from town began dropping by regularly. Some came to buy herbs, others to admire the structure he had built from scraps and stubbornness. Ravian kept adding improvements: automatic vents, rainwater collection, solar-powered lights. "You're turning this place into a sanctuary," one visitor said. He only smiled. When evenings came, he sat on the porch and watched fireflies blink across the field. Sometimes he wondered if his parents ever thought about him. 2 years of silence had passed, and not one message had come. But he didn't feel bitterness anymore. Only distance, calm, necessary distance. It wasn't loneliness. It was space to breathe. And that space had become the soil where his new life grew. One bright morning, while Ravian was sweeping the workshop porch, he saw a silver SUV driving slowly down the gravel road. The car didn't stop immediately. It rolled past his driveway, and the driver's face turned toward the land with wide, stunned eyes. Ravian's breath caught. He recognized that car. The license plate. The bumper sticker. Jalen. What is he doing here? Ravian muttered. He didn't wave. He didn't move. He simply watched as his brother's car crawled past the greenhouse, the cabin, the pond. Jalen looked like a man who had stumbled into a different world. Ravian waited until the SUV disappeared down the road before exhaling slowly. A strange mix of relief and curiosity washed over him. "Let him wonder," he whispered. 10 minutes later, Ravian's phone buzzed. He checked the screen and froze. A name he hadn't seen in years, his father. The call rang, stopped, then rang again. He let it go to voicemail. When the notification beeped, he pressed play. Jalen's frantic voice spilled out. "Dad, you need to come out here. You need to see this right now. Ravian's place is insane. I mean it. He's living like some millionaire in the woods. How did he even do this?" Ravian stood still, listening to every word. But he didn't feel pride. He didn't feel anger. He felt something deeper: certainty. Certainty that he didn't need anyone's approval for what he had built. 3 days later, Ravian was splitting firewood when he heard the slow crunch of tires again. This time, 2 cars approached, Jalen's SUV and his parents' black sedan. His heart tightened. He wiped sweat from his face and straightened his posture. The car doors opened. Jalen stepped out first, staring around with disbelief. "So it's true," he muttered. "You really did all this?" Ravian nodded. "With my own 2 hands." Their father stepped out next, looking older than Ravian remembered. His eyes swept across the land. "You built this?" he asked. Ravian answered. "Every inch." His father frowned, confused, almost offended.
"How?"
That single word carried years of doubt. Before Ravian could speak, Bronick appeared from behind the greenhouse, wiping his hands on a cloth. "He's not lying," he said calmly. "I only lent tools. The boy built this place himself." Jalen turned sharply. "And who are you?" Bronick smirked. "Someone who believed in him when none of you did." Their mother stepped out of the car last. She looked fragile, nervous, unsure. "Ravian," she whispered. "We're just trying to understand." He folded his arms, feeling the distance between them like a fence. "Understand what?" he asked. "How I survived without you." His father cleared his throat. "Your brother said this land might be worth a lot. We didn't know you were hiding something like this." Ravian laughed softly, not cruelly, but in disbelief. "Hiding," he repeated. "I wasn't hiding. I was living. The difference is you never looked for me." Jalen stepped forward, voice rising. "You don't get it, Ravian. Things have been hard. The house is falling apart. Bills are—" Ravian cut him off. "The house they bought for you?" Jalen's mouth snapped shut. Silence fell, sharp and heavy. His mother tried again, stepping closer. "Maybe you should come home," she said softly. "We can rebuild the family. We can start over." Ravian shook his head. "This is home." She blinked. "This?" Ravian gestured to the land, the cabin, the trees, the pond glowing in the sunlight. "I built this without your help, without your permission, without your praise. I don't need to go back to a place where love is measured by comparison." Bronick leaned against the railing, arms crossed, watching the scene with a quiet, fatherly pride that Ravian had never felt before. His father's face hardened. "You're being ungrateful," he snapped. "We gave you life. We gave you opportunity." Ravian met his gaze, without flinching. "No," he said quietly. "You gave opportunity to Jalen. You gave me a lesson that sometimes you must be your own family." The silence that followed was heavy, but it didn't break him. Not this time. Jalen looked around again, at the land, the cabin, the peace it carried. "You think you're better than us now?" he asked. Ravian shook his head gently. "No. I think I'm finally myself." When their cars finally drove away, Ravian remained standing among the trees, listening to the fading sound of engines. It wasn't triumph he felt. It wasn't anger either. It was release. For the first time, he didn't have to justify himself. He didn't have to shrink. He didn't have to beg for space in his own family. That night, he sat on the porch and watched the gold of the sunset rest softly on the pond. The crickets sang. The air was calm. Peace wrapped around him like a blanket. "They finally saw me," he whispered. "Not the version they invented, but me." That realization settled deep in his chest. The land had become more than a project. It was a mirror, reflecting the man he had become through discipline, silence, and persistence. A man who no longer needed applause to breathe. Later that week, Bronick stopped by with a six-pack balanced in one hand. He eased himself into the porch chair beside Ravian and let out a long sigh. "Heard they came," he said, taking a sip. Ravian chuckled. "They showed up like inspectors." Bronick grinned. "Families behave like that. They ignore you until they see something worth staring at." Ravian nodded slowly. "Mom said I should come home." Bronick raised a brow. "And what did you say?" "That I already am home." Bronick's smile softened, and he tapped his bottle lightly against Ravian's. "Good. Because this place carries your fingerprints, not theirs." They sat quietly after that, watching dragonflies hover over the pond, both men knowing that some conversations speak louder in silence than in words. In the following weeks, life returned to its rhythm. Ravian repaired a cracked window, extended the garden beds, and planned a small wooden bridge over the pond. Visitors kept booking the studio cabin, leaving kind reviews about the peace they found. "Feels like the world pauses here," one guest wrote. Ravian read the comment twice, feeling warmth spread through his chest. On weekends, children from nearby homes stopped by to help in the garden. Ravian taught them how to use small tools safely, how to sand wood, how to plant seedlings. He never raised his voice, never rushed them. "Patience makes things strong," he would say. The kids listened with wide eyes. In those moments, Ravian realized he was becoming the kind of person he always needed growing up: patient, respectful, encouraging. A man who gave what he never received. Then one quiet afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail. The handwriting was small, neat, and trembling. His mother's. Ravian sat at the table, turning the envelope over in his hands before finally opening it. The letter was short. She wrote that she had been wrong, not only about the money, but about him. She said she finally understood the weight of her favoritism and the damage it caused. She wrote that if he was ever willing, she would like to visit someday, even if just to see the life he built. Ravian reread the words slowly.
Part of him wanted to cry.
Another part wanted to tear the letter apart. But a gentler part simply folded it neatly and breathed. He wasn't ready, but he wasn't angry. He felt something softer, a small, cautious forgiveness beginning to grow like a seed. A week later, Ravian received a message from Jalen. No greeting, no long explanation, just one line. You were right. Ravian stared at it, unsure what to feel. Jalen had never admitted anything before. Not jealousy, not privilege, not the difference in how they were raised. Ravian typed no response. He didn't need more from him. Not now. Not anymore. He placed his phone aside and stepped outside to water the garden. Sometimes, healing didn't come from apologies. Sometimes it came from choosing peace over reopening old wounds. One evening, months later, Ravian stood by the pond as the sky turned pink and soft. The koi glided beneath the surface like living brushstrokes. A quiet realization washed through him. If they had given me that money, he whispered, I wouldn't be here. The thought struck him deeply. Without rejection, he would never have bought the land. Without silence, he would never have learned independence. Without their favoritism, he would never have built this sanctuary. Every wound had pushed him toward something stronger. Every slight had shaped him into a man capable of constructing both a home and a new identity. Ravian remembered his father's hard expression during the visit, the frustration, the confusion, the disbelief. He finally understood something about the man. His father wasn't angry because Ravian succeeded. He was angry because he succeeded without their help, without their control, without needing their approval. He measures worth in comparisons, Ravian murmured. But I don't live in that world anymore. He walked to the cabin and placed his hand on the wooden door he had sanded and sealed himself. Every curve, every line, every flaw reminded him of the long nights he spent building a life from scratch. A life no one could take credit for but him. Inside, the cabin smelled of cedar and faint lavender from the herbs drying on the shelf. Ravian lit a small lamp and sat at his table, feeling the warmth of the room settle around him. He thought of all the nights he used to lie awake craving a single sentence from his parents, "We're proud of you." Now he realized he didn't need it. Pride had grown inside him quietly, like roots deep under the soil. He had earned it through sweat, patience, and endless determination. Sometimes being the failure is the best thing that can happen, he said softly to himself. It frees you. As the evening deepened, Ravian stepped outside again. The air was cool, and the sky shimmered with stars. He imagined someone watching the story, someone who felt forgotten or underestimated. He spoke softly into the night as if speaking to them. You're not behind, he said. You're just building differently. The pond reflected the moonlight, and the frogs sang from the reeds. Ravian stood there for a long time, letting the peace of the land fill him. This wasn't just a home. It was a testimony that a man written off by his own family could still rise, still rebuild, still become whole. The next morning, Ravian woke before sunrise, as he always did. He brewed a cup of coffee and stood on the porch, watching mist rise from the pond. The world felt quiet, soft, and calm. He thought about the boy he used to be, the one who begged for a place at the table, the one who tried to earn love by shrinking himself. That boy was gone now, replaced by a man who built his own table, his own roof, his own life. As the sun brightened the horizon, Ravian whispered, "Thank you," not to his parents, but to the journey itself, to the hardship that forced him to grow, to the silence that taught him strength. He realized he didn't just build a cabin. He rebuilt himself. Later that day, a couple visiting the area stopped by the greenhouse. They admired the tomatoes, the hanging herbs, the small lemon tree Ravian had coaxed back to life. "This place feels peaceful," the woman said. "Like it was built with intention." Ravian smiled softly.
"It was," he said.
They bought a basket of vegetables and thanked him before leaving. Moments like that reminded him how far he had come, from being dismissed in his own home to being respected by strangers for his work. He wiped his hands on his apron, feeling a warm pride in his chest. This peace, this kindness, this simplicity, it all came from choosing himself over the pain that once held him down. As the days passed, Ravian focused on finishing the small wooden bridge he had planned. Bronick visited one afternoon, leaning against the railing as Ravian tightened the last bolt. "You know," Bronick said, "you could teach classes. Folks would pay to learn from you." Ravian laughed. "Me? A teacher?" Bronick nodded. "You've got patience, kid. And you've got a story worth sharing." Ravian paused, considering it. Maybe one day. Teaching others how to build, how to repair, how to create, it felt like something he could grow into. Something that could multiply the peace he had found. He tightened the final screw and stepped back, admiring the bridge that now connected both sides of the pond. "Looks good," Bronick said. "Looks right," Ravian corrected gently. 1 week later, a schoolteacher from town brought a group of teenagers for a small workshop. She wanted them to learn practical skills and believed Ravian could guide them. He hesitated at first, unsure if he was the right person. But the kids approached him with curious eyes and open minds. He taught them how to measure wood, how to hold a hammer, how to be patient with mistakes. "It's okay to try again," he told them when someone missed a nail. "Strength isn't about being perfect the first time. It's about being willing to learn." The teacher watched quietly, smiling. When the session ended, one boy said, "Sir, I want to build something like this one day." Ravian placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "You will," he said. "Just start with one step." That evening, Ravian walked around the land, checking the fence lines, the greenhouse vents, and the cabin windows. Everything he had built stood solid and strong. He paused near the cherry trees where tiny blossoms were beginning to open. He thought of his mother's letter, the apology he didn't ask for but received anyway. Healing didn't erase the past, but it softened the pain. Ravian wasn't ready to see her, but he knew someday he might be. Not out of obligation, but out of maturity, the kind he earned on this land. "One day," he whispered. "Not now, but maybe one day." A few nights later, Ravian sat inside the cabin, sketching designs for a small guest hut he planned to build next. The soft glow of the lamp warmed the room. Outside, the wind brushed the leaves gently. Ravian lifted his head as a thought struck him. If he had received that money years ago, if he had been treated equally, he might have lived a comfortable but hollow life, a life shaped by his parents' expectations. But here every board, every brick, every breath was his. This life was earned, not given. Built, not handed down. And that truth filled him with a quiet gratitude that felt deeper than any praise. He stepped outside, stretching his back as he gazed at the moonlit pond. The reflection shimmered softly, broken only by the graceful movement of the koi. Ravian whispered, "I'm not the failure." Saying it aloud felt like shedding old skin. He wasn't the forgotten son, the background child, the shadow. He was a builder, a creator, a man who had learned to stand tall without applause. The land around him echoed this growth, strong beams, firm soil, steady water. Everything he touched had become something meaningful, something alive. And for the first time, he truly believed he deserved it. The following morning, Ravian received a message from the schoolteacher. "The kids loved your workshop. Can we schedule another?" Ravian smiled as he typed back, "Yes, anytime." Teaching gave him joy he never expected, and it connected him to the community in ways he hadn't imagined. After sending the message, he checked the booking calendar for the guest studio. Fully booked for 3 months. He stood there stunned, then laughed quietly. Life wasn't just stable, it was growing. Opportunities he never looked for were appearing naturally, like wildflowers that bloom without being planted. That afternoon, Ravian sat by the pond again, resting in the shade of a maple tree. He watched the water ripple, thinking about the long journey that brought him here. Pain became purpose, he murmured, and purpose became peace. He knew many people out there felt forgotten, the way he once did. If they could see his story, he hoped they would understand something important. Progress doesn't always come fast. Sometimes it comes plank by plank, nail by nail, quiet day by quiet day. Ravian leaned back on the grass and closed his eyes, letting the wind move gently across his face. Here, he wasn't Jalen's brother or his parents' disappointment. He was simply Ravian, whole, steady, and free. As days passed, Ravian continued tending to the land as if caring for an old friend. He repaired a loose board on the porch, tightened the hinges on the workshop door, and added new stones around the pond. Each improvement grounded him. In the quiet, he often thought about the past, not with bitterness, but with clarity. They shaped me, he admitted softly one evening, standing under the cherry blossoms. Not by lifting me up, but by forcing me to lift myself. The wind brushed against the trees, carrying the scent of spring. Ravian breathed it in, knowing he had finally stepped out of the long shadow cast over him since childhood. He didn't hate his family anymore. He simply didn't need them to define him. One afternoon, Ravian hosted another group of teenagers for a workshop. They laughed, made mistakes, and asked questions endlessly. He guided them with calm patience. "Hold the drill steady," he said gently to one girl. "Your hands know more than you think." When they finished building a small wooden bench together, the students cheered. The teacher whispered, "You're changing lives." Ravian smiled shyly. "I'm just teaching them to build."
But he knew it was more than that.
He was giving them the encouragement he never received, the belief that they were capable. As the kids boarded their bus, several waved excitedly. "Bye, sir." "Thank you." He waved back, feeling something warm and deep blossom inside him. That evening, Ravian sat at his porch with a notebook. He began sketching ideas for expanding the retreat, maybe a second cabin, maybe a small workshop for community classes. The land felt full of potential. "This place saved me," he whispered. "Maybe it can help others too." As he continued drawing, he noticed how steady his hands were. Years ago, they had trembled under the weight of rejection and doubt. Now they moved with confidence, purpose, and quiet pride. Every sketch line felt like a reminder that he had built a life no one could take credit for except him. At night, Ravian walked along the stone path leading to the pond. The moon reflected on the water, broken only by the graceful movements of the koi. He sat on the wooden bench the students had built. "Funny," he said softly. "Something made with imperfect hands feels perfect right now." He realized he had become a man who no longer needed to compare himself to anyone, not even his brother. Jalen's decisions were his own. Ravian no longer carried the burden of feeling less. He carried peace instead, earned peace, not given. The pond rippled gently, as if agreeing with him. The next morning, Ravian checked his mail. Another envelope waited, this one from his mother again. This time, it was even shorter. "I won't push," she wrote. "But I want you to know I'm proud of you. Truly." Ravian sat on the porch, steps reading it 3 times. He didn't cry. Instead, he let out a long breath, a breath he felt he had been holding for years. He wasn't ready to invite her yet, but he placed the letter gently inside a wooden box he kept for important things. Not because of the apology, but because of what it represented. A step toward healing, slow but genuine. A week later, a man from town stopped by with a business proposal. He wanted to collaborate with Ravian to offer weekend building classes for adults. "People love your story," the man said. "They feel inspired by what you've created here." Ravian felt a small shock of disbelief. Inspired? By him? He agreed to consider it. After the man left, Ravian walked back to the cabin and looked around, the greenhouse, the workshop, the blooming garden. "This is what happens," he whispered, "when you stop begging to be chosen and start choosing yourself." The land didn't just hold his past, it held his future. That night, Ravian made a simple dinner and ate it beside the open window. The sound of frogs echoed across the fields. He felt full, not from the meal, but from the life he had built. A life without noise, without judgment, without competition. Just honest work and honest peace. He cleaned his plate, set it aside, and lit a small candle on the table. He remembered the countless nights he once spent craving a single kind word from his parents. Now he didn't crave anything except quiet and purpose. "This is enough," he said. And it truly was. Before bed, Ravian stepped outside again. The stars glittered brightly above him, reflected gently on the pond. "If someone out there feels forgotten like I once did," he whispered into the night air, "I hope they know this. Being overlooked doesn't mean being incapable." He sat at the edge of the porch, letting the cool air brush against his skin. The peace he felt wasn't loud or dramatic. It was steady, deep, and earned. It lived in his rebuilt beams, in the soil he planted, in the cabin he shaped with raw, determined hands. Standing there beneath the starlit sky, Ravian felt whole. Truly whole. He smiled softly and spoke to whoever might one day hear his story. "If you've ever been told you're not enough, remember this. You're not behind. You're just building at your own pace." He walked back toward the cabin, pausing at the door he had carved and finished himself. "Build with heart," he murmured, "and let peace find you when you're ready." Then, before stepping inside, he added gently, as if speaking to someone watching from far away, "Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with anyone who needs strength tonight." The door closed softly behind him, and the land settled once more into the quiet, healing night.